Okay, so we're starting back again. Um, this next phase of our agenda today is going to be more panel-based, so it's going to be less about you guys just having people talk to you, but really getting to hear the perspectives of many individuals that have not always been in our meetings. This first panel is the Citizen Consumer Panel, and it says Perceptions on Identity and Identity Challenges. This is greatly the work of Jim. Um, it's really important for us to be able to balance the things that we're trying to accomplish and ensure that if you look at that picture we just showed a few minutes ago, that whole end user section, that we do get to hear the voice of the individuals that sometimes we forget that we're not just representatives of the organizations and the companies that we work for, but at the core of it all, we are individuals as well, and that the needs that, the things that interested you in being involved in identity still exist regardless of the organization you're a part of. So we have a great panel that we are going to allow them to introduce themselves and then really share with us a bit about identity challenges that exist within the communities that they represent. And then after that, open it up to the floor to allow you to be able to ask questions as well. So I'm going to turn it over at this point.
Thank you, Kim. I appreciate it very much. I'm Jim Barnett. I'm with AARP, also known as the Life of the Relying Party. And I'm also a board member representing consumer organizations. So that's my role here. And just a little bit more about the format, I'm going to introduce you to our panelists here in just a moment. And we're going to let them talk for about 5 minutes about the challenges, and then we'll open up to questions, and we'll take it from there. I just want to take a quick moment just to point out a little bit of history. 50 years ago this week, the Senate passed the Civil Rights Act, and that outlawed discrimination on the basis of race, religion, sex, or national origin. And those are what we call today, in this room, attributes. So I just want to connect that from 1964 to today before we get started. One of the great things about being here in Washington, D.C. is we have lots of people who have great policy expertise, advocacy expertise, and we've gotten several of them here today, and I'm going to just talk a little about their backgrounds before I let them launch. Jay Stanley, to my left, is Senior Policy Analyst with the American Civil Liberties Union's Speech, Privacy, and Technology Project, where he researches, writes, and speaks about technology-related privacy and civil liberty issues and their future. He also serves as editor of ACLU's Free Future blog, which focuses on privacy and technology issues. Jay has authored and co-authored a variety of influential ACLU reports, including Bigger Monster, Weaker Chains, which is an examination of the confluence of new technology and weakening privacy protections, The Surveillance Industrial Complex, which traced the growing intersection between government surveillance and the private sector, and Protecting Privacy from Aerial Surveillance in 2011 about drones. Jamia Adams is director of digital media at the NAACP, and she has responsibility for content of the organization's national website, its email program, mobile program, and multimedia programs. And she ensures that the digital output mirrors the mission and goals of the NAACP in supporting fundraising and advocacy campaigns. In 2012, Jamia was part of a State Department consulting team that provided digital media training for journalists in Kosovo and Macedonia, and helping build ties between Christians and Muslims. She also has been a Google Fellow with Personal Democracy Forum. Mark Reichert is Director of Public Policy for the American Foundation for the Blind. He provides leadership in development and management of AFB's public policy agenda, and he serves as AFB's primary representative before Congress and federal agencies. He manages the organization's Public Policy Center budget and staff. Mark helped write the 21st Century Communication and Video Accessibility Act of 2010, and he worked on accessible voting provisions on the Help America Vote Act of 2002. And I'm going to turn over to Mark and let him talk a bit about identity issues and his view on it, and we'll take it from there.
Thanks so much, Jim, and I hope you all can hear me. I attended most of the last session, and there were some really good rip-roaring jokes out there, and this audience was so quiet. And they told me that you all were really responsive to humor. And so when I saw that last session, I thought to myself, good grief, I wonder if I should even try any funny lines with these folks. I might fall into, I might exacerbate one of my complexes or something, if y'all don't laugh at those jokes. When I told my boss what I was doing today, he said a conference on identity crisis would be perfect for me. So in any case, it was very charitable of those three of you who just laughed about that. Thank you. See, I knew if I tried hard enough, either the sympathy vote or I actually would make some of you laugh. This topic is a very serious one, and I do appreciate the invitation, Jim, and thanks to everyone for putting on this conference. We're, I guess, just going to do a couple of brief remarks each, and then hopefully we can get into more of sort of a back and forth among us and hopefully with you. I guess let me put my bottom line up front, or my bluff out there for all of you. In the disability world, particularly in the community that I have the privilege to represent, the real challenge is to make sure that issues of accessibility for folks with disabilities, particularly folks who are interacting with technologies, with specialized technologies, so-called assistive technologies, to make sure that those accessibility concerns are built right in up front, front and center of any discussions, whether we're talking privacy, whether we're frankly talking about the marketing of specific products. It really doesn't matter. So often when we've had conversations with various groups, whether they be in the healthcare arena, talking about electronic health records, whether we're talking just to audiences straight up about e-commerce, inevitably what seems to happen is a sort of siloing of the whole question of accessibility. Not so much that people don't care about it. I don't think that that's the case at all. I think that there's sort of a sense of compartmentalization, and I think like anything else, people at conferences, you'll have the panel on privacy, you'll have the panel on diversity, you may have the panel on accessibility, and unfortunately it tends to sort of be segment the issues. The only real effective way, and this is coming from someone who isn't the technology guru in this room. I'm the policy nerd, one of them, I suppose. I'll be the only nerd at this table. It's a question not only of technology, but it is also a question of commitment. So let me just give you an example. Many websites, if you visit them today, the accessibility is growing tremendously. Certainly over the course of the last 10 years, there's been a tremendous amount of progress made in making more online presences accessible. Certainly now in the mobile age, the key is to make sure that apps are much more accessible to folks who are blind or visually impaired. And how basically do you do that? I mean, there are a lot of technical specs that go into making websites and mobile apps more accessible, but really the bottom line of it is to make sure that all buttons, controls, fields are appropriately labeled. Sounds very, very simple. In a sense, it really is. Of course, there are some elements that require a bit more intervention, but that's really what it's about. You'd be amazed at the number of times when you get to a website and you fill out all the forms successfully with your screen reader, the piece of software that reads the text of the computer screen aloud to you. You fill out all the forms successfully, and now you get down to the submit button. And the submit button doesn't work because, of course, the label that should have been on the right spot to tell you where you're supposed to click the submit button isn't there, or it's somehow misplaced. And that is exceedingly frustrating. It's just one of several examples of the kinds of inaccessibility barriers that we face. When we talk about identity issues and how best to enter identifying information, the same kind of dynamics are in play, making sure that when you're called to enter in your credentials, that in fact you're able to be sure that you're on the right line. That in fact you're on a form field into which you can enter appropriate text. How do all of these issues get resolved? Well, if the website's already deployed or a particular app is already deployed, of course you're talking about retrofitting, and that's incredibly hard to do because of course the thing is already up. And it's also a question of getting attention to the group that's already put up the website or the app or what have you. The real benefit is to get to those folks from the get-go and to say to them, okay, as you're designing your stuff, Make sure that accessibility concerns are right up front, and that as you make modifications to your website and to your apps and other things, that the accessibility standards, of which there are quite a few and are available internationally and fairly well known, are adhered to. Those are very important things to ensure. How do you get to those people right away? I mean, ultimately, it's a question of culture. As I said, it's a matter of technology. It's also a matter of commitment. I think there needs to be a recognition, broader awareness, and thank you for the opportunity to add, hopefully, to some of that awareness up here, of the fact that there are standards for accessibility that are available. I think most people understand that. What we've got to do then is move to the stage of commitment where it's not a question of simply saying at some stage, okay, we're talking about privacy here, let's make sure that the person, the individual is protected, and then we sort of talk about the accessibility after the fact. If you talk about it after the fact, I'm not going to say you might as well not do it, but it is exceedingly hard. It certainly places a burden on the consumer and makes it much harder for the folks who are actually doing the design. One final comment I'll make at this stage. You know, for me, it's a question of using specific pieces of assistive technology to interact with the site or what have you that's requiring my identification. The key is to make sure that anything that's done that requires the person with a disability to interact with that thing is done, allows for a number of approaches, a sort of a multimodal approach, if you will. There are many folks who are blind or visually impaired, many folks with disabilities who use screen reader technology, as I do, to essentially have the computer screen read aloud. There are others who don't use that technology. They, in fact, make the screen larger through magnification software, etc. We can all use our imaginations about various folk with disabilities who may need to interact with that technology in a different fashion. Someone who's deaf or hard of hearing, for example, is certainly going to interact with the various forms of identification that require speech, for example, or other things. So the key, of course, is to make sure that things are done in a multimodal fashion. And again, the standards, such as the R internationally, do allow for that kind of an approach, to allow for interaction with the sites and other things to be done in a multimodal fashion. The only other thing I'll flag is that, and this is a bit beyond the consumers that I have the privilege to represent, but for a lot of folks with disabilities, particularly folks with mental disabilities, cognitive, so-called intellectual disabilities, these are folks for whom identity issues are even more complex in the sense that there may be others who have responsibility for credentialing these folks. And I am no expert in this field. There may very well, and I hope there are, folks in this audience and perhaps online who are expert in how best to do that when you have folks who are credentialing folks on someone's behalf, essentially a proxy approach. That is, of course, not so much a technology issue as much as it's a policy issue in how we make sure that folks who might be left in a more vulnerable position because of the kind of disabilities that they have are nevertheless, that their rights are honored appropriately. So Jim, with that, I think I'll close and look forward to the discussion of the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Mark. That was fantastic. Jamia has gotten a deep dunk today, and we'd love to hear what you do, how you do it, and just some thoughts about what you've seen and heard today so far.
Sure. Thank you, Jim. My name is Jamia Adams. I'm the director of the Digital Media Department at the NAACP. Thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this panel discussion today. My work at the NAACP, the United States' oldest civil rights organization, is to frame and strategize our whole digital output. We do a lot of advocacy campaigns via email, via social media, via mobile technology, as well as multimedia. And all of these digital outputs really reach different audiences. We have a unique situation at the NAACP that probably is akin to what Jim deals with at AARP, in that our membership are older. our average member is about 65 years or older. And so with the digital work that I do, there's also a big part of onboarding people into using digital technology to add to their organizing toolkit. We want to teach people how to use mobile to organize, to get out the vote, to campaign for certain issues in their local areas, as well as to use email effectively to change issues and policy around the country that affects the civil rights of all Americans. Our constituency is mostly people of color, primarily African Americans, and with that, it's not African Americans who are members of the NAACP. It's not a general monolith as to what they all want is the same thing. We have offices throughout the whole United States. We have about 1,200 units. And within those units, our units are varied. California has issues that they work on that are very different from the issues in Mississippi. As Jim mentioned, we have a lot of anniversaries coming up. So in keeping with our civil rights anniversaries, we're trying to point people to the history of this country and then also talk about what we can do to forward those motions. So we're doing a huge civic engagement campaign around Freedom Summer, which was an effort in 1964 to register voters in Mississippi. African American voters specifically, who were prevented from the vote by their local citizenry and the law and whatnot. So young people from all over America, black and white, took buses and trains down south to Mississippi to register African American voters, risking life and limb. And so next week we'll be celebrating them with a conference and an event where we are re-engaging and getting young people involved with this new struggle, this new fight for voting rights. A lot of laws, particularly in the South, are being turned around to preclude a lot of people from voting, mostly African Americans, mostly older people. There was a time where African Americans of a certain generation were not allowed to be born in hospitals, and so as a result, they don't have birth certificates. So there's this new movement. It's not new, but the recent movement the last few years of voter ID is really affecting this group of folks, and so we're trying to work to thwart those efforts through legal means and advocacy in several different states. Some of the issues that we're interested in as far as identity and privacy. As I said, a lot of the work that I do is training, and once I go out in the field and I'm training our members, a lot of times they're asking, who is taking our information, who's using our information. They're concerned about privacy and how that information is being used. And I preface that by telling those stories about the egregious things that happen in the history of our country, because these are some citizenry that remember those stories or were told those stories by their grandparents and their parents. And so they have a mistrust that some Americans don't have. And so their concerns about privacy and identity and who can take their information online or who can use or see their information is a true concern. So I'm interested in this group and being a part of it because I believe that the African American constituency, older people and rural people and people who don't have the means, meaning they're not readily accessible, they don't have internet connection. It's a lot of Americans who don't have access to the internet. And a lot of times these type of forums don't consider those types of people. So working for the civil rights organization that I work for, I want to make sure that we're thinking of all those people. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jimmy. That was fantastic. And Jay is with the ACLU, which is a member of IDSG, has not been as active recently, but is really very attuned to what this issue means going forward for the digital age. So Jay, please
Thanks,
cover that.
Jim. Thanks. So yeah, we've been interested in this project from the beginning, mainly because what we're afraid that it could turn into. I mean, identity systems, a national identity card is something that we have historically opposed and always opposed. because identity systems can be used to regiment and control and for things such as the pretty transparent attempt to suppress voter turnout and so forth. And at the same time, we do recognize that there is a social need in some situations to identify oneself, and that infrastructures for doing so are probably inevitably going to emerge one way or another over time. That we recognize that there are alternatives to the NSTIC vision that are proceeding full speed on other tracks like Facebook. And we recognize that there are ways of doing it that can be done right. But the concern is that building an infrastructure for those situations those gaps that exist now, things that cannot be done on the internet now because of the lack of identity infrastructure that will be able to be done, that once that infrastructure is created to allow those things that can't now be done, that infrastructure will then be used to identify and track people in everything else. We've seen this with offline identification where once an identity system is created, that there tends to be demands for identity left and right for no good reason, often for security purposes when it's, it really has no security value at all. I guess there are two things that we worry about happening with regard, once the sort of and we've heard, in the security world, there's talk about a driver's license for the internet, and there are different ways that a driver's license for the internet could come about. One would be direct government imposition, but more likely and more insidiously, an infrastructure created for certain specific needs would then morph into it through private sector pressures. And we are living in a world where there is tremendous incentives and pressure and power to collect information and gather information about individuals and store it and sell it and buy it and slice it and dice it. And so in that context, we need to be very careful about putting a whole new infrastructure onto the internet, which has been such a great thing for freedom of speech. I'm part of the privacy and free speech project at the ACLU, and those are intertwined. And the reason we're one project is because they're very closely intertwined. But the two things in some ways that we worry about are that an identity system would be used for tracking of individuals and that it would be used to prevent anonymous speech. So anonymous speech is a very long and honorable tradition in the United States. The Federalist Papers were written anonymously, and the Founding Fathers wrote things anonymously. Anonymous speech can have many good effects. It allows weak people to tell truth to power, and so forth. And when you lose the ability to speak anonymously, which has been such a great thing on the internet, allowing people with psychological problems or troubled histories to meet and speak freely in online communities. The chilling effects can affect the powerless more than they affect the powerful. At my children's school, there are parents who are power lawyers in Washington, D.C., and there are parents who clean their offices. And who is more likely to feel confident enough to send a complaint to the principal and without having to worry about repercussions? It's the lawyer. The powerless are much more timid and afraid generally to speak truth to power and can use anonymous speech to counterbalance that in many ways. And then tracking. I mean, obviously, tracking on the internet is being done through various different means. The advertising industry is building systems for tracking online. If it's not done right, then something like the NSTIC system could easily become a much more systematized and difficult to combat system for tracking online. And security imperatives are here, of course, and are part of the NSTIC discussion. They always have been, and so there will always be an impulse to create, forensic ability. So if there's a hacking attack, we want to know go back and see exactly who did the hack and where they were and who they came from. And that would be a good thing from the perspective of solving hacks, but it would have all these other implications in terms of ruining anonymity online. So again, we're in a situation where there's very strong incentives to track and to force the use of ID. So an ID infrastructure is created to allow people to access financial information that they can't now access securely online, And then suddenly everybody and their uncle is requiring all their customers and all their readers to participate in that system because they want to be able to track them securely. And there's an ongoing battle between the advertisers and individuals about, individuals clearly do not want to be tracked on the internet. The polls all show that. And yet the advertising industry is building a giant infrastructure for tracking all of us quite successfully. But there are things you can do to evade it if you're technologically savvy. And I think that there's going to be, and sometimes those tools are spread and democratized. I think there's a sort of a battle going on there. And we don't want to see that battle decisively ended in the wrong direction. So I think that one of the potential bad effects of that kind of tracking that could really affect, in some ways, some people more than others, is the effect of big data and guilt by association. There was a story on, I think it was CNN about a year ago, about an individual whose credit limit on his credit card was lowered because, and he asked why, and they said because he shopped at a place where the other customers had bad credit histories. Okay? So now there's two perspectives to view that. There's the perspective of the institution. That is a perfectly valid, profitable assumption to make, right? You have a group of people, you know this about them. This group of people is going to be less profitable and more high risk. So let's treat them. Let's lower their credit limits. From his perspective, it was guilt by association. All he did was shop at a place where other people did something. And so the interests of individuals, the interests of large institutions, when it comes to big data and slicing and dicing this tracking information, can diverge. And those kinds of divergences can especially affect those with low incomes, those with a blot on their record, whether it's a criminal conviction or bad credit or what have you, and often minorities, mainly because of those first two things. So I think that these are some of the concerns that we, as that my organization has about playing with fire and trying to build a powerful new infrastructure for identification on the internet, which has been such an engine for speech and anonymous action. That said, if it were done right, it could even be better than the status quo if we create an infrastructure that allows people to act anonymously in ways that they cannot now act anonymously. Then it could actually be a really good thing that we would get behind. We would urge our members to participate in. We would say good things about it in the media. But it's but it has to be done very, very carefully because there is this giant hunger for tracking of individuals. There's more I can say, but I'll stop there since I have 5 minutes and we can move on to better discussion.
No, that's great, Jay. Thank you, and appreciate your perspectives, all of you. Now, my charge to you here is this panel is intended to sort of shake the snow globe a little bit here, so to maybe make you think about some of the things we assume or maybe don't think about quite enough. So given what our panelists have said, think of some questions perhaps you might like to address to them. And while you're doing that, I'm going to start in. And Jay, I've got my first question for you. It's interesting what you described as what may have been called in a previous age redlining. You're in a certain area, and because you're there, you get tarred with a certain conviction of some sort. So I'm wondering, in this room, we talk a lot about the four principles of NSTIC and IDSG. Interoperability, security, privacy enhancing, and affordable. My question to you is that enough? Are those principles enough? If we do that, does that take care of the problems you've outlined?
I think that if it's privacy enhancing and allows people to do things on the internet without them being tracked and information being collected about them and dossiers being built up about them, which then can be subject to data mining, then I think that if that privacy piece is done right, that it can be enough. There may, I'm just trying to think, but if your privacy is protected, I don't see how the redlining can be. I mean, the redlining can take place, but the transactions that you're using the NSTIC for would not feed into the redlining algorithms.
Another thing we're talking about a lot this week is our value proposition. So what about the affordability piece? The solutions you've talked about out there now are free, nominally free. What do you make of that?
So they're free, but they're not free because there's, of course, the famous cartoon on the internet where the pig is sitting in the sty saying, "This place is great. All you can eat food, free shelter. This is awesome. I love this place." And at the bottom it says, "If you're not the customer, you're the product," right? And so, when you are using all these free services on the internet, you are paying for them with your privacy. And the customers are the advertisers of Google and all these companies, and you are the product that they are selling to the advertisers. And so I think that there's an increasing sort of realization about this, and of course there's always a long arc of privacy. There's a period where a new technology or technique comes into play that is actually invading your privacy and collecting information about you. And then there's the period where kind of that sinks in and everybody realizes that they've lost their privacy in that area. And there's often a long lag there. And I think with the Snowden revelations in the last year and all the attention that's being paid to privacy, I do feel like I'm seeing, after talking about privacy for 12 years at the ACLU, I do feel like I am seeing a much broader recognition of what's at stake here. And I think that that may translate to an increased willingness to either pay for solutions or put up with some minor inconveniences in order to protect privacy. And I think that that's a trend that's only going to grow because people's awareness is going to continue to catch up even as the technology accelerates underneath them for invading privacy.
Right, I was going to ask you, you've mentioned the Snowden revelations. We've also had the Target hack. We've had the Heartbleed problem. What's it going to take? I mean, that's my question to you. I mean, those things don't get people energized about it. What will it take, do you think? A real meltdown of some sort?
I think that there will continue to be meltdowns. I remember I don't know if it was actually true of Huey Long, but the movie about his life, what was it called? The famous movie about Huey Long's life. But anyway, he was sort of the demagogue governor of Louisiana in the 30s, and he made his career because he was running around complaining about building practices in schools, and nobody else was talking about it, and he was complaining about it. And then his school collapsed, and a lot of children were killed, and suddenly he was a hero, and that made his political career. And the point is, if things are not being done solidly and done right, and you're out there warning about it, eventually you'll be proven right. So I think that if the privacy practices are out, I mean, look, privacy has got different elements, and there are some that are culturally relative. Some people put naked pictures of themselves online, and other people don't want to show even a naked ankle. And those kind of things are culturally relative, but there are other ways in which privacy is not culturally relative. We all need to be able to have private conversations with intimate people. In politics, you need to be able to say some things to some people without others hearing them. That's not going to go away ever. So in the end, people will demand their privacy, and if they don't have it in certain communications methods, then they'll route around them to less efficient communication methods. So to wrap, what was your main original question? Just to wrap.
Well, the affordability question. Basically, if it's free, can we deal with that in some way?
Right.
To address the fact that the tools out there that are being used are free and may not always be entirely privacy enhancing.
I thought that was the previous question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Tell you what, we got a question from the audience. So let's turn to our audience here. Please, Andrew.
Hi, it's Andrew Hughes. My question is around complexity and uptake and I guess intrusiveness. So there are many in the technology community that feel that there are answers that are privacy protective that could be deployed at low cost or no cost. But given the people that you represent, the communities that you represent, where's the balance between the nanny state telling you that this technology is good versus the ability to contemplate if the technologies and approaches are good for you, or I guess, it's not very well articulated, but how does IDSG get out of the telling mode, telling you that these new ways might be better, and get more into the interactive mode to learn what is better for your constituencies?
Andrew, if you don't mind, I'm going to supplement your question a little bit too.
Yeah, please.
And I'm going to throw it to Jamia, actually. You talked a bit about trust, and I want to sort of highlight the role of context in the user experience, what it looks like coming at you. And we talked a bit before this panel about the history of African Americans and being told one thing and another thing happening. Just talk about that history and how organizations have created that context, how do you think about the context in which your members receive messaging about things like an identity solution or something that is policy related? So it's kind of an opening question, but it's the
Sure.
context piece I really want to get at.
Yeah, sure. So I spoke about it a little bit earlier about the historical breaches that have happened, not just with the African American community. I mean, the Japanese American community. I mean, there are a number of Native American communities. There are a number of different communities within the United States that have had a major breach of trust with this government and with organizations that have been complicit in taking advantage of certain organizations. So to answer the gentleman's question, which I think he was asking about, there are these solutions that are available, and I have offered some of the people that I'm training and organizers that I train in the field these different solutions, but they're still reticent because there is, as Jim was saying, that lack of trust, and that lack of trust is built upon the history that they've endured or that they know of. So I think it's a matter of rebuilding that trust and demonstrating that these solutions truly are effective for protecting their privacy. Almost, every month or so, people are calling asking about data swaps. They want, our information within our organization. And a lot of times they're fellow organizations, but even if they're fellow progressive organizations that we are in line with politically and policy-wise, we're reticent to even use those types of data swaps because we will lose the trust of our members and our constituents, because not all of our digital subscribers and social media subscribers are necessarily members of the NAACP, but we hold a certain trust within them that we don't want to breach. So I think it's a matter of continuing discussions, bringing in more diverse communities to plan the policy around identity and privacy, and making sure that you have all of those different communities involved, all those different constituencies involved in that conversation to really build that trust.
That's a great perspective. Thank you. We have a couple more questions over here, it looks like.
Hi, I'm Jim Fenton. I think everybody that's participating in IDESG, or very nearly everyone, is earnest about putting together an identity ecosystem that subscribes to the core principles, that's privacy protecting, and that it is easy to use, and so on and so forth. But we still see all of the news articles about about that we're putting together some sort of a government ID scheme that's going to track everybody and make everybody's activities transparent to the government. So, to the panelists, how do we convince your constituents that we are earnest about what we're doing? It's very hard to prove a negative, that we aren't tracking people or that we aren't storing a bunch of information. How can we best communicate to your members that we are sincere about these principles that we talk about?
Any takers? I'd like to hear from all three of our panelists if we could. So why don't we start with Mark down there in the end? Why don't you?
Well, so thanks. Jim, when you recited the four principles that you have, of course, the first thing that popped in my mind is, hey, well, why don't we add a fifth principle on accessibility? And then I thought, well, I'm not so sure we need a segmented fifth principle on accessibility. Maybe if we do that, we'll put it as number one. Of course, naturally, I want to have.
I counted under easy to use.
But I mean, and honestly, I think that the approach that I'm advocating is that it be part of each one of those principles. That really, I mean, interoperability is an obvious one, for example. I mean, we'd want to make sure anything that's developed here is clearly interoperable certainly at a minimum doesn't interfere with assistive technologies that are used for the sole purpose of allowing someone with a disability to be able to interact online. I think the way that certainly the disability community would respond more favorably, not that I don't think our community has focused on this that much, to be totally honest with you. And I think part of that is, I think, because there are so many, not so much bigger issues to tackle, but frankly, more, immediate issues in the sense. I don't know that this is necessarily as much on our radar as it should be. But if you want it to be much more on our radar, and especially if you want the disability community to be much more sort of in tune and responsive, I think having a clear, overt, even if it is at this stage a verbal commitment, overt commitment to accessibility at all stages, I think that would certainly go a long way.
Great. Jimmy, you want to touch that?
I think it's part of what I was talking about before. I mean, bringing more stakeholders into the conversation. When you're in an ivory tower, developing policy for the masses, you have to make sure that you are you have input from all of those different constituencies, and just not telling people that this is good for them and yes, this is good for you, you should just believe me, but really involving them in the decision making. A lot of times, I come from the campaign and digital world, and a lot of times, we will do a campaign and we'd say, okay, we want to help a certain group of people get polluted lands or polluted industries off their land. And we developed this campaign without ever talking to that particular community. And by that, I mean not just a constituency, like if that community is black, talking to another black person, but talking to a black person who is from that specific community, talking to a person who is geographically affected by that particular community, to make sure that they are part of the decision making and can help form the policy.
Fantastic. Thanks. Jay, please.
I mean, I think that there are a lot of suspicions around this project for the reasons that I mentioned earlier about the history of identity and the things that it's been used for, the fragility of the internet, the security imperatives that are behind it. I think that the best way to deal with that is the proof is in the pudding. Come out with a really good proposal that I can look at and I can say, yes, that will empower individuals. That will not that will not provide yet another tool for companies circling around like sharks, eating up everybody's privacy, but will actually empower individuals to protect their privacy and shift power that way, or at least be neutral. And then, I would love nothing. I mean, we're critics. Our job is to be critical and go out there and but I would love nothing better than to, when the final product comes out, to say, this is great. I highly recommend everybody adopt it. And I hope I can do that. And people, there's going to be suspicions out there. They don't know you. They don't know anybody here. They don't know their motives. They don't care. The proof is in the pudding in the final product.
Thank you. Jeremy.
Great segue to my question. So I'm not a card-carrying member of the ACLU, but I might be interested in becoming one if I could get a different kind of card than the plastic one I carry in my wallet. Specifically as a guy who, by virtue of my job, is sort of deeply committed to the NSTIC guiding principles and has concerns about how much can we get the marketplace to start developing ones that are truly privacy enhancing. I can't think of an organization that would be better suited to actually develop one that would be truly more privacy enhancing than anything else out there than the ACLU, or I can actually think of several other privacy and civil liberties organizations. I say that because as we talk about the trust gap that's out there, I think as the identity ecosystem starts to emerge based on this framework that we're developing in a collaborative fashion in this environment, you will have a segment of the population that's perfectly happy getting a credential from a Fortune 500 company that they're doing business with. And as this panel's very clearly pointed out today, there's going to be a segment that's just never going to trust them, even if there is a certification that's behind it. And something that we're quite excited about, that the beauty of NSTIC and the identity ecosystem framework is that it really will be a framework where any organization could develop a solution to become an issuer of credentials that we could use online. And so I'd love to get thoughts of the panel. I know AARP has come out already, and expressed an interest in doing something in this area. But what role could you guys play in actually being not only critics, but also part of the solution, and actually coming up with your own branded identity solutions that could then be used, so I could then become a virtual card-carrying member of the ACLU and use that as a tool to better protect myself when I go online?
I'll start. Yeah, well, I mean, I think that would be cool. You know, I think that what we would offer is trust. You know, people would trust, at least a certain segment of the political spectrum would trust us. I don't know that we have any competency in developing in such a thing institutionally, and I'm trying to think who on the organizational chart would tackle it. You know, we do have a couple technologists working for my team, the team that I'm on now, who maybe could do something like that. But yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing that would be great if, you know, if the ACLU could create an identity system that the people who trust us, that we wouldn't invade their privacy, could then use for all kinds of other transactions. I think that'd be cool.
I'm going to pivot that question a little bit for Mark. Mark, is there a brand that would be the equivalent of that for the disability community? That I don't know of any, but I'm wondering if there is one.
No, and I'm not so sure if there were. I'd want to advertise it. But I think you know, there are a number of organizations. American Foundation for the Blind is certainly one. There are a number of organizations in the disability community who, of course, devoted themselves to the whole question of making the online or mobile worlds much more accessible and usable for people with disabilities. We do that as just one piece of the larger effort that we are involved in. But I think, you know, turning to those sort of expert voices on, you know, the technical how do we implement these solutions is great. Again, to be the broken record, since they say repetition is the key to education, you know, the key is to involve whomever it is you're going to reach out to earlier on in the process, as early on in the process as possible. You all are developing standards. I mean, I think if it's in the extent to which you can make sure that folks who are adopting what you all do are thinking about the accessibility questions, that you are helping to blaze trails with your requirements around accessibility, I think is key. I want to go back for a second, Jim, to this notion, because I think it finally occurred to me what the other question was about, having to do with, you know, how do we move from telling people what to do to hopefully enticing them. I mean, I think on some levels, somebody has to set the standard, and from a certain point of view, standards are judgment calls. They aren't simply technical. They aren't simply implementation or engineering strategies. They are judgment calls, and so whether we think of it as a sort of, you know, very prescriptive thou shalt, or providing people with options, I mean, I think on some levels what we want to do is eliminate excuses. At least that's true in the disability side of this equation. So often we've heard over and over again, oh gosh, if we only had known about the accessibility standards, we would have been pleased to implement them, and so we'll do our best now in the aftermath. I don't know if that's considered, you know, prescriptive, trying to lord over people, tell them what to do. I hope that folks take that sort of approach, that what you're trying to do is to eliminate as many excuses as possible for folks to do the wrong thing, whatever that happens to be. In our sort of corner of the world, that has to do with making sure that we have access to the stuff that everyone else has access to. If you ask a group full of 100 and some blind folks, how do you feel about being tracked on the internet? Are you worried about your privacy? They're going to tell you everything that Jay and Jimmy have talked about. I mean, the concerns are there in our communities just as they are in any other community of Americans, I expect, especially with all the news we've had to swallow. The little twist that we have sort of in our neck of the woods is whatever it is that we're trying, that folks are being expected to do. If you're interacting with a business, a hospital, it doesn't matter, that the expectation that is placed on the consumer, the user, to do certain things cannot be burdened by that user's inability to use that stuff simply because of disability or because the assistive tech doesn't work with it.
Jimmy, I'm going to tweak the question for you just a little bit too, if you don't mind. I'm going to take Jeremy's question and phrase it as, what would your members make of an NAACP branded identity? And also, what would your leadership make of that? Would they know what to do with it? Would they know how would they approach that?
Well, if it was an identity that every organization used, we would still ask about the data and how that information was being collected. You know, a lot of times we'll develop different digital pieces. Like we developed a mobile app, and we had a couple of sign-ons where we realized that our folks wouldn't want to sign on with a Facebook or sign on to this app. They just wouldn't want to use it without a sign-on. So we would still have to have kind of like a brain trust where we would talk about how this was being used and talk to our members about it, talk to our leaders about it, because again, you know, I'm probably the most technical person at the NAACP, so it would be an indoctrination period. So I'll just stop there and give the folks time to talk.
Kim, we're at time, I know, so I want to make sure we're respecting everybody's time. Do we have time for one more, perhaps? Or?
Yeah, let's, we do have a remote question as well. We've kind of touched a little bit of it, but why don't we pass it over to one question from you, and then this is obviously a conversation that we need to have more of. A few people have asked, could we extend it? And I know that we have some hard stops for the panelists, but I think that it's definitely the starting of a conversation, not the only time that we're going to have this type of dialogue. And we hope that you are become an active part of the IDSG in the future.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Terry Weaver. I am a retired Fed, and my area of interest has been accessibility also as well. And I think what's been raised here, and I heard this a couple of times, is that there's lots of areas of expertise within the federal government that are doing things that are not getting expressed. So when Mark talks about people not knowing about that there is rules to make, there are guidance on how to make something accessible. You know, when it's 2001, we passed Section 508, and it's now 2014, and hopefully by the end of this year, the revision comes out. There's been guidance out there. So my question is going to be, you know, we're even talking about identity cards. One of the last things I was involved in the government before I retired was working with the people doing the card identification for government people, and we talked a lot about how do you make it work for people with disabilities? Orientation, cards were no longer just something you showed to get into the building. It wasn't just a physical access, it was a logical access. You couldn't get on your computer unless you can get on your card. And I went through a lot of conversations with them about how to do such a thing within their own environment. Not technology in most cases, but a lot of it was basically raising awareness and figuring out how to make it work for people with varying abilities. But that information is not here. How do you get that? How do we make the government information more shareable, and asking to companies or organizations like yourselves, when you hear about these things, maybe sharing it more? Because I'll tell you this, government people are not good at promoting themselves. They're kind of more really into trying to make sure they meet their citizens' requirements and forgetting how to promote. So if you can promote the government, you're going to help them a lot.
So I'm going to rephrase the question a bit here and say, you know, there's a resource out there. There's a lot of standards and that. How do we get the word out, maybe? And I'll just take maybe a one or two sentence answer from each of the panelists in conclusion.
Ladies first.
Mark, you go first.
Okay. I would say, you know, let folks know where the website is to, but I think that it's accessible, but I'm not the expert on it. I mean, I would think that I can find anything that's on the internet, you know, so I'm probably the worst person to ask. I don't know.
Well, I'll jump in then and say, I mean, I think what you all have done by inviting us to participate here is an obvious one, so great to hear that this is the beginning of a conversation with groups like ours and many others. Terry, know you very well. Glad to hear you out in the audience. Whatever Terry Weaver tells you to do, go do it. Maybe not unreservedly, I don't know. I won't give you that blank of a check. I don't know, I'm teasing you. But I think the biggest thing is, aside from involving consumer and other groups from the various segments of the community, certainly when it comes to accessibility, it's the multimodality sort of approach, making sure that there isn't simply one way to interact with the technology. I think that alone goes a very, very long way to allowing that kind of thing, because Terry's right. I mean, the truth of the matter is it's not even so much of technical accessibility sometimes as much as it is simply understanding what the options are. And if we clearly communicate that there are any number of different ways in which we can allow folks to credential themselves, and I think that will go a long way.
Any last thoughts?
No, I don't think I do.
Okay, great. Well, thanks to our panelists. This is a great session. We really appreciate the insights, and let's join in saying thank you to our panelists. Appreciate it. That was great. Thank you so much. It was fantastic.
Well, we have have a number of committees that we would love to have members of the American Federation of the Blind, NAACP, ACLU, all of them being engaged in different aspects. So, like I said, this is the beginning of a conversation. I think that most of our panelists actually went to our new members orientation session, and so I really think that this is just going to be a great start of a longer relationship, and we need to look for more citizen and consumer groups to help give us perspective. So now we're going to shift to one more panel before we have our adjournment for the day, and this is to give us a chance to hear in more detail about some things that are going on with our pilots that have been funded through the NSTIC program. So I'm going to pass this now to our pilots, and I guess they can come on stage. Are you going to come one at a time or all together?
We're one pilot.
Okay, here you go.
Sudhi? We are not GTRI, but we like those people very much. Okay, good afternoon. My name is Matt Thompson. I'm the co-founder and chief operating officer of ID.me. To my right, we have Amy Eli, who's one of our relying parties. She's the senior marketing director for e-commerce at Under Armour, hence the Under Armour shirts today. And then Ryan Fox, who's our VP of product strategy at ID.me as well. And let me figure out how to advance. Okay. Well, in addition to being a little bit technically challenged up here, I wanted to set the stage by saying that when my business partner and I started ID.me some 4 years ago, we did not have any experience in the digital identity space, which as time goes on, I think more and more that was a good thing. We were just two Army Rangers who found ourselves right out of combat up at Harvard Business School and wanted to solve a real business challenge for a real community that was very important to us, which was the veteran and military population and military family community that had no way of proving their military affiliation online to access different benefits from all these organizations that wanted to give them some type of benefit for their military affiliation. So we set out very decisively to develop a solution that solved that problem for this community and solved the problem that the organizations had around fraud and abuse of the programs they wanted to give to the military community. So that's really where we started, very acute kind of problem for a large community, both of citizens who happen to be veterans and service members, as well as for organizations that wanted to deliver them benefits. We've been recognized both as a pilot here within NSTIC, as well as we were recently named one of the 100 Brilliant Companies by Entrepreneur Magazine, a finalist for Wall Street Journal Startup of the Year, and we were named the most veteran-friendly small business in America by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So this is a little bit about where we've been. I kind of articulated that up front with the challenge that the military had. You know, as veterans and former service members, we understood the pain point that this community was experiencing and the need that organizations were depending on this document that we had that had all of our sensitive and personal information to produce that to them to prove our military affiliation, to access different types of benefits. The interesting thing about the military community, if you think about it, was a great entry point for us into digital identity because this community is eligible for benefits kind of across a wide spectrum of levels of assurance, if you will, in the commercial space, from commercial discounts all the way up to federal benefits from the VA and different agencies that had taxpayer-funded programs for the military community. So we established the first real-time digital identity solution for the military to verify military affiliation to an organization. Fortunately for us, not having any identity background, we were developing our technology and our policies at the same time the NSTIC was published. And it's this community, the NSTIC document, that really helped us form our strategy and our technologies to map to the guiding principles, as well as a lot of the work that's been done from people in the different communities, certainly privacy standards and a number of the other communities here in IDSG that really helped kind of influence the development of our product. And as I talk to people about our technology and about our business, I don't say that we're in the digital identity space. I say that we're in the trust space. We have over 500,000 service members and veterans, a very sensitive population who trust us as their identity broker online. We have a number of relying parties, about 100 to 125 today, that rely on us or trust us to give them accurate information. So we're really, while we're in the digital identity space, obviously, we're also view ourselves as being in the trust space, and we've built our core technology and our policies around that. So we've responded to market demand. As we enabled this product very successfully for the military, a lot of our customers said, well, hey, we want to offer this benefit to a broader population, such as first responders and students and teachers and senior citizens, government employees. So we went out to map to all the different authoritative databases for those different status attributes, and we really learned early on that the primary identity attribute information wasn't enough for a lot of the relying parties. There was a need in the market for status or characteristic attributes to be bundled together with primary identity, and then for a consumer or for a citizen to be able to allow an organization to have access to that information. We've strengthened the trust associated with our credentials from what started as a level 1 credential primarily in the commercial space to up to a level 3 credential, which will complete our audit under the Cantera Trust Framework provider by July 18th at level 3 to enable higher assurance credentials, to enable government agencies to consume our CSP as well. This is an example of our user flow with Under Armour, who was one of our first pilot partners. You can see in the left screen there Troop ID and First Responder ID buttons. And as a veteran or service member or police officer is shopping on Under Armour and they see that they're eligible for this benefit, they have the option of verifying their group affiliation using our technology and then authorizing that information to be shared with Under Armour in order to access a discount that Under Armour wants to offer them for transparently exchanging that information. And so we recently published a case study with internet retailer and Under Armour to help kind of spur adoption within the e-commerce community of basically our identity solution. So that's why we invited Amy Eli here today to talk a little bit about the program and why they chose to work with IDMe and some of the benefits of that program to date. Sammy?
How's everybody doing this afternoon? I know that I'll be sitting in rush hour traffic on the way back up to the office after this meeting, so you'll have to excuse me as I leave after this portion of the presentation to try to beat that traffic. The one thing about Under Armour, if you know anyone who works for Under Armour, is we have a great appreciation for the military and first responder community. Thank you so much. I'm a little bit shorter. And you know, that's expressed in many ways across our company, the UA Freedom Division, particularly among our give back portion of the business. So, you know, we're out there, we're working with the Wounded Warrior Project as well as several other aspects of the military and first responder community. And as a piece of that, offering a discount in our stores was a no-brainer. In our Factory House and our Brown House stores, offering that 10% discount for the military and first responders was a natural piece of our business. But the challenge that we ran into is our shoppers also wanted to shop on our .com site, which is the part of the business that I work on. And when you get a phone call in the customer service center saying, hey, I'm military, give me my 10% discount, there's not a whole lot you can do to really verify, justify that that person is truly telling the truth. So the ID.me team was actually, their card was passed on to me by an executive on our team a few years ago in 2012, and we realized the opportunity to really extend the benefit to the military community early on. And one thing that we really respected about their company was really their tie-in with the military community, their foundation from, actually being in the military, but they just established that level of trust with us, that they were truly gathering the right data to prove that these customers were who they said they were, and they weren't just trying to take advantage of an Under Armour discount, which we know come few and far between. So one of the additional things that we really liked about this particular experience for our customers is that it was a very simple process, and there was no point at which Under Armour was touching any sensitive data, social security number, blood type, anything like that. We weren't asking for copies of military IDs or anything along those lines. It was a simple modal that popped up on our site, information was filled in, sent to the ID.me team, and then it sent back a token to us to let us know that yes, this person does meet the criteria to get that military discount, and we can offer that benefit to them online. Very, very simple, and just the way that we like it for our customers, because we want them to complete the checkout process rather than get hung up there. As an additional benefit to this is it's really helped us reach out to a greater and broader military community that may not realize that we have this benefit available to them. It enabled us to talk to the troop swap community, which is a part of the ID.me family, and it's also enabling us to identify the shoppers on our .com site that are military and speak to them effectively. So if they opt in to receive emails from our company, then we can tell them when we're doing great promotions online related to Memorial Day, Independence Day, Veterans Day, to really say thank you for your service. We do have some additional benefits available to you during these time frames especially, and come shop on underarmour.com if you so please, and use the ID.me technology to check out. So all in all, it's been a great benefit for us from a community standpoint, from engaging with the military overall, and there's definitely some business benefits to it as well. Us being able to talk to a community that returns to our site regularly and is actively engaged in loyalty to the Under Armour brand is incredibly valuable to us.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon.
So, as we expanded this service to a wide range of commercial parties, we obviously noticed, as many people in the room do, that there wasn't really an established framework in the commercial space. So as we go out and talk to a lot of our commercial RPs, we've relied on the FICAM levels of assurance to kind of map to the value or the benefit of the service tied to the amount of risk. And it's really been a pretty massive education exercise for commercial RPs. I'm always surprised and kind of elated when a commercial RP has heard of FICAM. So, that helps with a lot of what I explained. But I just want to highlight that one of the biggest benefits about NSTIC from our perspective, the work that's being done in the IDSG, is that it helps educate and helps give comfort to a lot of commercial RPs, and it has certainly spurred adoption of our technology, for one, within this space, which has helped us serve a greater population of service members and veterans. And really, this is kind of the way that we see the world, is that we need to be able to offer this community a credential that they can use across the levels of assurance. Again, we started by issuing level 1 credentials, which we've been through the audit process already with Cantera to be approved at level 1. But we want to be able to enable one credential across all these different levels of assurance for a service member. And by doing that kind of across a network of relying parties which span those levels of assurance, both in the commercial space as well as in the federal space, it eases the friction both on the end user as well as the organization relying on that information for the identity, because they're not having to put them through a one-off identity proofing process or verification. They can benefit from the fact that we've already verified certain information and can allow that user to seamlessly authorize that information to be shared with that RP, both reducing the friction and the cost to the RPs by doing this across the network. And then over time, we're able to strengthen that credential as the end user goes to access higher kind of value risk types of benefits by adding additional and stronger identity proofing and authentication to that process as well. So we're 2 kind of quarters into our pilot. We've been working very hard and fast because this is an exciting and fast-moving space. As I mentioned, we've completed our level 1 service. We've done a lot of work to our core system to enable a SAML service in addition to OpenID Connect and our OAuth service that we started with. We've been doing a lot of RP architecture and onboarding. We'll be going live with the U.S. Chambers Hiring Our Heroes program soon to enable an SSO across all their digital properties. That's the largest military hiring initiative within the private sector, as well as working with Microsoft on some of their military initiatives, and then Iraq, Afghanistan Veterans of America, which is a large veteran service organization serving my peers who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're currently underway with our level 2 and 3 audit, again through Cantera, which we anticipate having complete July 18th, which will enable us to offer our service to the military community at the higher levels of assurance. And I'm going to turn it over to Ryan Fox to talk a little bit about what we've learned, because really we believe our role as a pilot is to feed back a lot of the learnings we're having in the ecosystem to the IDSG and to the different steering groups.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so part of the process for engaging in an INSTIC pilot is giving back and providing information and feedback from our observations for real-world implementations as we go through the process of system development, core enhancements, RP integrations, et cetera. So we wanted to take the opportunity today to just review a couple of those with you, and then happy to engage offline or after this presentation if you need further definition or questions around it. One of the things, first of all, is around the FICAM levels of assurance. I know there's a lot of talk around this. We are always constantly joking internally with ourselves about level 2.5. And the observation here is not that the FICAM LOAs are insufficient as a basis for trust, but when it comes to interoperability, there's a lot more granularity that's often required by that RP in order to establish interoperability between one another. So the question here is the LOA enough? Is there something else, some additional guidance? Will the frameworks span that gap as we go down that road, et cetera? Lack of commercially available products for this multi-tenant CSP. We've talked a lot with other pilot operations and realized that there's not a lot of people out there that are actually using COTS products when they're building out these systems. We're building our own. We went down the road on an initial prototype as we started into year 1 of this effort and found the COTS product to be insufficient for our multi-tenancy, independent policy administration, et cetera, for the onboarding of multiple RPs across that trust chain, supporting circles of trust, et cetera, and have since made the decision to build this from the ground up. What's going on with that? Why are there not companies offering these products out of box, given all the effort that's been done? KBA standardization, we submitted a white paper on this one. Some of you may be familiar with this. The idea here is that when I went through the KBA configuration process, this is a 40-plus page document, which each page offers me a different opportunity to make a different selection and tune and configure, which is nice. It's very wonderful and allows me to configure this product specifically as I would like to, but when I go to then interoperate with someone else who's completed that 40-page document, do I need to compare those one-to-one to ensure that I have trust and interoperability between the two? INSTIC and the derived requirements, aligning the current state of the market. A lot of conversations taking place on this one as well. Is there a gap between the derived requirements and the actual existing current state of the market? Is there some perhaps modifications or tweaking that needs to occur there based upon the conversations we've had with the RPs? And then the last two are kind of interchangeable to some degree. But as we heard from Amy today, onboarding RPs is really about understanding the business challenges and the needs. It's not just about identity. Identity does not drive RP adoption. It's core, it's a baseline requirement, but identity and security are often latent requirements inside of the RP community, and leading with an identity or a security argument is oftentimes not the best approach to onboard an RP. Rather, identifying their business needs and requirements up front, leading with that argument, and ensuring that you have the strong foundation of identity and security is in fact the best way to adopt those RPs. Finally, what we need from you, again, this is just kind of building off the observations, but increase in visibility on the COTS technology providers. What we're really looking for here are reference implementations, reference technical implementations. Are there examples where within the pilot community certain COTS products have been used to bridge these gaps and to provide this functionality. Can you help us have visibility into what those were? Derived requirements, again, the enhancements there. And finally, the trust mark, the ability to kind of come out of the gate and say, we've been through this process, we adhere to these policies and procedures, we're safe to do business with. That's what we have.
Are we doing questions at the end, or how do you want to handle that? Okay, thanks.
Thank you, IDME team. So as you may have heard, we're going to be holding questions till after the rest of the pilots I've briefed, and then we'll be holding a panel Q&A afterwards. So please hold on to your questions. I think next will be GTRI. Mr. John Wendell will be presenting virtually. John, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
We can. Thanks, John.
Wonderful. My name is John Wendell. I'm the GTRI Principal Investigator for our NSTIC pilot, Scaling Interval Trust through a Trustmark Marketplace. And I want to first apologize for not being able to be there in person. This just happens to be the week that we are hosting our committee and governance meetings for the GFIPM and NEAF community, and that takes a lead time of 120 days to get that in place. So I apologize for that. So as a brief refresher here, we established the NEAF, the National Identity Exchange Federation, 4 to 5 years ago to support the information sharing requirements of the justice and public safety community. That spans federal, state, local, and several industry partners. And over the course of building out the NEAF, we ran into a number of scaling challenges that were barriers to adoption. And we believe that these are some of the same challenges that the identity ecosystem will face either sooner or later. So our pilot is about finding scalable solutions to these challenges, and that's our primary motivation, then sharing them out with the broader community. So the first challenge that we ran into was that there's many independent trust frameworks and federations and communities' interest, identity initiatives that we needed to work with. And in our community, this became known as the interfederation problem. Second big challenge we had was that NEAF requirements were being driven from many different perspectives, such as many of the IDPs, the relying parties that would participate in the IDSG. The cumulative set of requirements that each of the IDPs, relying parties, needed to satisfy in order to onboard or become a member was becoming daunting to many of them. It was an all-or-nothing proposition to be in the club. You were either in the club, you went through the onboarding process, or you did not, and you were out of the club. And then finally, the third big challenge is we're pretty early in the maturity curve for trust frameworks and identity federations, and requirements are continually evolving. There's new protocols, new policies, new attribute profiles, new use cases, best practices, new vulnerabilities. And early adopters can begin to feel like they're being punished for their early participation. There's rework they have to do to continue to participate. And we wanted to look for ways to lessen that and minimize that pain. So our approach to address this and other related challenges is through the concept of trust framework componentization and proper granularity for reuse, captured in well-defined machine-readable trust marks. Now, I know this is an update. We have about 15 minutes here, so I'm just going to refer you back to the previously Atlanta plenary session for the concept, and later in the presentation, I'll refer you to our website for the details. For the rest of this presentation, we're just going to cover the progress from where we made from our last presentation forward. It falls into these 6 different areas that cover the scope of our pilot. So first of all, during the Atlanta plenary, we launched our project website with our goal of being as transparent as possible to be able to contribute in substantive and meaningful ways back into the IDSG, to engage the IDSG and get comments. I will tell you that the products, if you've been following that website that we post out there, fall 4 to 6 weeks behind our actual internal progress. We encourage you to continue to engage us through that site. We've had about 500 unique users since the Atlanta plenary visit that site, and many of them have engaged us in conversations and feedback. We'd like to get that number up, but we do appreciate that. If you subscribe to the blog there, then when we post major updates to the site, we will notify you through that blog. So essential to our concept is a well-specified trustmark framework with normative specifications. The framework formally identifies the actors, the roles and responsibilities between those actors based on open technical specifications that would enable independent tool development and a broader set of participation. So in this area, we've made quite a bit of progress since the Atlanta Plenary. Here's a list of products which we have been working on developing. Many of these are now being posted to our website. Normative specifications for what machine-readable trust marks should look like, what trust mark definitions should look like, trust interoperability profiles, sample policies and agreements to facilitate a trust mark framework, and then finally what we call the last mile. How do you bind a trust mark to an actual endpoint in the identity ecosystem the right way? So we're going to be publishing guidance on how to do that. Our target date for completion of sufficient versions of all these products to facilitate a pilot is August of this year. So our engineers have also spent a significant amount of time going through the needs and the FICAM trust frameworks and designing machine-readable trust mark definitions with the intent to maximize reuse, not only within our pilot, but beyond our pilot. And we've already completed about 57 of these specifications. Many are published to the website. Soon, some other ones will shortly be published there. We've also begun to talk with some of the other pilots and communities of interest for reuse of these trust marks in their frameworks, as well as identifying trust marks that may be useful in the future, such as an accessibility trust mark, COPA trust mark, research and scholarship, and various privacy-protecting trust marks. So here's some quick statistics that our analysis to date has uncovered. Within the NIST trust framework, we've identified 82 distinct components. We are going to need 63 of those for our pilot that we'll talk about shortly. 57 of them we've already developed. Going through the FICAM trust framework, we've identified 41 of them. 32 of those overlap the NIST trust framework, so we're already seeing substantial reuse from the original trust framework we had and the FICAM trust framework. We've also done a crosswalk of the NSTIC guiding principles and the derived requirements with the list of trust marks that we've developed and the ones that are on the to-be-developed list, and there's quite a bit of overlap, and you can see those counts here on this chart. So each trust mark definition has a number of parts that are in a standard format, and here are some of the main ones. A set of conformance criteria for that trust mark, the assessment steps and process for that particular trust mark, the metadata that wraps it, that makes it machine understandable, machine readable, and a set of assembly instructions. And these instructions tell the assessor if they can issue that trust mark based on the composite outcome of each of those steps. This is how we get consistency across a broad ecosystem where there's many assessors and many independent specifications. Now, based on the nature of specific trust marks, some are very detailed with a lot of steps, and others are very simple with just a few steps. So another significant contribution of our pilot is going to be some tools to facilitate the use and adoption of a trust mark framework, not only within the pilot, but beyond the pilot as we push these tools out to the community in the form of open source. Two categories of tools we've been working on so far. First, tools that help with conducting trust mark assessments and issuing trust marks. We call it a trust mark assessor tool, primarily used by trust mark providers. And then tools that help trust marks be consumed and used within your federations and your trust frameworks, effectively bridging the gap between today's products and monolithic trust frameworks and that defined by componentized trust mark framework. We call these tools the Trust Fabric Management Tools. So a quick look at how these tools will be used in the framework and specifically in our pilot. So for the assessor tool, since all trust mark definitions conform to a consistent format, any trust mark definition, no matter who it's written by, can be fed into the assessor tool. The tool then walks the assessor, trust mark provider in this case, through the assessment process for that particular trust mark. It facilitates the collection of any required evidence and generates and issues the machine-readable trust mark to the trust mark recipient. So here's a sample screenshot based on a FICAM LOA2 authentication process trust mark definition that we've written. On the left-hand side is a list of all the assessment steps. When you click on one of the steps, it brings up the details for that step with instructions to the assessor. We get consistency that way. The assessor must record satisfaction of that particular requirement and upload any required evidence. This evidence is then stored as due diligence, then can be provided later on if it's ever challenged. So here's how these tools will be used in our NEAF pilot, which we'll talk about shortly, for issuance of trust marks. First, a NEAF member, whether it's an identity provider, a line party, or an attribute provider, decides which trust marks they want to apply for based on their business needs. For each trust mark, NEAF, the trust framework provider, as a trust mark provider here, will use the assessor tool, follow the assessment process for that particular trust mark, and issue a set of trust marks to the recipient. These trust marks will be included in the standard SAML 2.0 metadata entry for that participant and placed in the NEAF Trust Fabric registry. So NEAF members, shown here as trust mark reliant parties, can now query the registry based on their business, trust, interoperability, security, and privacy requirements and receive back entries of other members that meet their requirements. Since this is returned as standard SAML 2.0 metadata, it can be installed in their existing COTS products or products that they're using today that support SAML. And that is a huge advantage for adoption, so we don't have to wait for a whole new set of products to come out there. We can use this infrastructure and framework today. So all of these activities are leading to an initial operating capability that we'll pilot with the existing NEAF membership. We expect to have this in place, this IOC capability, this September. The IOC milestone is significant because it demonstrates that all of the moving parts of the framework can effectively come together in an operational capability and capacity. And then from that point forward, it's going to provide a great opportunity to capture operational feedback and lessons learned going forward. Beyond that initial operating capability, we have a number of high-value objectives that we plan on demonstrating over the remaining period of performance of the pilot. I'll go through some of those here. We want to demonstrate the issuance of trust marks to identity providers and reliant parties wanting to participate in NEAF but not able to meet all of the monolithic requirements that we have today. We want to demonstrate issuance of trust marks to identity providers and reliant parties in other law enforcement federations besides NEAF. There's several of them out there. We want to demonstrate acceptance of trust marks issued by a trust mark provider other than NEAF. We want to demonstrate componentization of FICAM requirements within the NEAF Trust Framework can lead to incremental adoption of FICAM requirements over time. We want to demonstrate the issuance of trust marks to reliant parties and identity providers outside of the law enforcement community, and that can be used in cross-COI data exchange scenarios. And then finally, we want to demonstrate reuse of trust mark definitions across multiple trust framework providers and COIs. And there's other objectives as well, but this is a good set. And it goes beyond just doing it with NEAF. If we can demonstrate these here, think about your own use case and your own communities that you represent and how you can use those same principles and lessons learned to bridge your requirements as well. So we're not through the pilot, as you know, but we have a lot of lessons learned we've gathered so far today. First, we realize we're not alone in thinking about trust framework componentization. There's others out there today. We're working with many of them. We realize that trust frameworks actually can be componentized, but we realize that when you want to componentize it, you just can't look at your framework and componentize it. You need to look across multiple trust frameworks if you're expecting reuse of those components. Also, by componentizing these trust frameworks and trust marks, it can help the evolution of these trust frameworks. If they're not monolithic and you have adopters that have built into those, you will have better visibility in what parts of a trust framework change and evolve over time, and lessening the burden on your identity providers and relying parties going forward over the life cycle of the trust framework. We realize there's a lot of overlap in these trust frameworks. People say the same thing, put the same requirements in with different words. Very often we don't have to be creative. We can reuse things that exist, and proper componentization will drive convergence. And we've seen that within our own trust framework, just looking across the small handful that we have. We said, why did we come up with this requirement? We can just reuse what FICAM did here, or we factor out the part that's common and have a separate little component for that which is genuinely unique. Also, normative specifications are insufficient. We have to have well-defined assessment processes. If we're going to get consistency across the ecosystem and be able to interoperate and trust across the various different silos that are out there today. And when you dig into the specs with the intent to automate conformance or formally define assessment processes, you realize that all specs are not created equal. There are some good ones, and there are some that really aren't very good. They're very, very loose or too high level. There's a lot of ambiguity in those. There's too much optionality. And you can use these trust mark definitions to actually clarify and tighten up where you need to, or even broaden a profile where you need to get more interoperability. We also realize that the concept of trust marks can be applied to many dimensions, security, privacy, trust, interoperability. We really haven't found a concept that we have not been able to build a trust mark definition for, so that's been encouraging. And then finally, trust mark adoption will require bridging technologies and tools to be able to leverage the products that are already in the marketplace. We can't reinvent everything. We need to figure out ways of reusing these components and these standards to get cross-COI, cross-silo interoperability, but using the infrastructure that we have in place today. So how can the IDSG help? We want to engage the IDSG through having individuals comment and review the trust mark framework that we're proposing. There's lots of content. We're publishing our specifications out there. Continue to get engaged through the website, or you can contact us directly. We've built a number of trust mark definitions that we believe can be reused across many of the pilot projects, and we're engaged in those discussions. Take a look at those. We're willing to do additional birds of a feather, willing to have other conference calls if you're interested to go down in the details of how it could possibly fit what you're doing. We need to figure out ultimately the trust mark defining organizations. Who should carry this forward beyond this pilot set of activities, whether it's some of the SDOs that are out there or other consortiums, and it may be best for fit depending on the particular trust mark definition. And then, are there other scenarios that would be beneficial to the IDSG in addition to the ones we identified earlier that are worthy of trying to demonstrate this new framework and so forth in? And then please visit our website. We'd love to engage you. We'd love to share the lessons learned. Everything that we're basically building, whether it's tools or specifications, it's our intent to make it freely available and open for all to use. And thank you.
Thank you, John from GTRI. Next, we will have Privo. Coming up to present will be Denise Taylor and Steve Greenberg.
Hi, good afternoon. We are going to give a presentation a little bit about what we're doing on the pilot, try to hit the same points that the others are talking about what we've learned, what we might expect from the organization here. And then I'm going to turn it over to Steve to do somewhat of a demo. We're not going to try a live demo in a room full of technologists and others, but we're going to provide some screenshots that will demonstrate what it is that we're working on here. So when Privo came to the organization, the IDESG, we came as an interested party who'd been hanging around the space for quite a few years, sort of trying to figure it out on our own, and doing a lot of consulting and certification for companies' compliance with a federal law called the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. And in the meantime, as an entrepreneur, I had built some technology that I thought would address the use case that we work within, and found that it, although it was aligned in a lot of ways with the guiding principles of NSTIC, it was not hitting on all the marks. And so we were really pleased to be one of the pilots that could take, that was, in a situation where we were able to be a pilot and progress what we had put together and move it to a next generation that I think will be a good use case for the ecosystem. So what we were asked to do was three things. One was to create the Minors Trust Framework, so a policy framework specific to the issues around minors. To demonstrate parental consent at internet scale. That's why our RPs care about working with us. And in the meantime, to educate those that we could about how privacy fits into the ecosystem. So Privo itself is, we help online services obtain verifiable parental consent as defined under COPPA, the regulation. At the end of the day, companies need a respectable way to be able to interact with protected demographics, children being one, and there's a lot of rules as to how that would happen. So currently you have individual companies, not as RPs, but rather off doing their own verification of identity in an effort to process parental consent on a sliding scale. So show of hands in the room, how many know about COPPA? And if you know me, I know you do, so, all right, well, that's a reasonable. How many of you are parents or grandparents, right? Okay, all right, and you're thinking to yourself, how would we ever get kids to actually participate in the ecosystem and tell the truth along the way? And there's lots of challenges that do come from this space. All right, so we have to inform parents about the privacy practices of our individual RPs. We, in the past, never had a place for a parent to come to direct. That's something that's launching in our fourth quarter of the grant. How we end up interacting with parents is on two fronts. They either come to us because a child initiated a relationship at an RP, and that child then initiated the process to bring the parent into the fold, or the parent heard about us otherwise and came to Privo Central to create an identity credential potentially, or present one that they already have, and add their children and manage consent. So we end up offering a federated identity to the parents. We also offer a kid-friendly federated identity to the children. We do this because there aren't a lot of them that already exist out there, and so it's in order to get our service out the door, we have to play a number of the roles in the process. And then building a marketplace of sites and services that are compliant with the policies that are outlined by COPPA, but more importantly, our Minors Trust Framework that incorporates COPPA and then tries to go beyond that. And at the end, sort of putting together a solution that both offers technology and the policy front. So our accomplishments to date, and it's funny, I look at this list and I'm like, just writing that policy framework is an accomplishment, and we didn't list it for some reason. But we're migrating RPs that we were already familiar with, smaller companies that have, a reasonable size user base that we can interact with. So we successfully met a milestone that got us over the hump and got us to a couple 100,000 users that now have federated accounts on our system. We're using OpenID, so when I first got started, we built our own homegrown authentication service, and so that's been deprecated now, and we are OAuth, OpenID, and also SAML. We are integrating with IDPs, so we've successfully done that with our first corporate partner, which is VMware, and we'll see a little bit of that in the demo. Obviously, the single sign-on, well, we won't see it live, but we're going to see an illusion because it actually does work in the test bed. But and they did give us the authority to mention it here as long as there's no PR and quotes going out. So don't anybody tweet what I just said. Parental consent, delivering it easy to understand, so we've made some progress on the forms, the transparency that we're trying to deliver for the parent, and a template approach for them to be able to interact with our service. We're adding new methods for verifying identity, one of which being employer accepting SAML credentials. We're really excited about a global kids club that's coming to us from the UK that is trying to bring a contextual-based ad network into the U.S. for the kids space, which is a big issue and difficult to deliver. They have 1.2 million accounts that they're going to bring into our service, and we will be the underlying federation that helps them deliver a global kids club. And they have a number of exciting things going on, one of which is they own a company called Swap It, which is the way that kids, it's like an eBay for kids. And then the kids tablet, that's something we're really excited about. We were approached by a tablet manufacturer who's, sort of duking it out in that space, and the tablet that will ship later this year will, when you launch it, you will create an underlying Privo account, and we will manage all of the account registration, authentication, and consent management across the apps, and also provide some of the actual review and assessment of the apps that they bring onto their tablet. Lessons learned. Trust frameworks are not easy to write. I don't know about any of you. I know there's a trust framework group here that loves to read this stuff, but it is really tough to put this stuff down and get a number of people to all agree. So we're at a point now where we are inviting about a half a dozen folks from the community who are willing to sign an NDA with us to take a look at what we've created and give us some real feedback so that we can come to the community in the next quarter and actually sort of open up the kimono and let others participate. We want to find other frameworks that we can interoperate with. The folks at CDSII, I'm sorry, I always get the acronym mixed up, are one that we're working closely with. And then we're also talking, I think, with the Respect Network folks, because they've got a lot of good ideas there, and we have a personal interest in seeing personal data stores emerge. Privacy is complex. It's hard to get people to do the extra step. I'm telling you, at the end of the day, people want convenience and transparent. They say they want transparency, I suppose, but do they actually do the steps that are necessary to get through a process that's more transparent without complaining about the fact that they have to actually read more or understand more? So we hope that we will get a lot of feedback from parents that are going through the system and other adults and educators that are using it. We end up storing data, so we do end up delivering similar to ID.me. When a user has a Privo ID and authenticates to a service, there may be a small bundle of information that's non-PII that can be passed so that the relying parties can provide the right content. If we have actually processed the consent for the relying party, then in that case, we're actually their service provider, and we've requested consent from the parent for certain pieces of data to flow. So if we are processing the need for an online newsletter, better to have us collect the email address from the parent than to necessarily ask the child to provide the data over and over again. So you process consent for something, it's usually because you're either collecting, using, or disclosing data in some way, and we may help to facilitate that. So the lesson learned there is that the personal data stores haven't really emerged for us to point to, but the goal is for us to have the least amount of data as possible, but to still help facilitate the process. And authoritative sources for parent-child relationships, they exist all over, but they're really hard to sort of get in an electronic way. And there's a lot of regulation going on around some of the rules that the educators have to deal with now, the educational systems. So that may have seemed like a really easy place to go a year ago. It may not be so easy now. Our ask to the IDESG is, to keep working on the consumer value proposition for privacy, and as you're figuring it out, to help us so that we can communicate that as well. Those of you who have an interest to maybe do some guest blogging and help us on our Online Privacy Matters campaign and information that we're putting out. moving faster, I know everybody's doing the best that they can, absolutely. We have to have this trust framework sort of out the door before the community's going to get a chance to sort of finish off what you're doing. So I hope that we'll dovetail okay and that it'll all come together and that there's not too much more time. We're waiting for some of that. But mostly what I want is for the organization to be successful so that we can spread the word and help grow the ecosystem. So my biggest ask is whatever it takes for us to be successful, that people sort of figure out a way to do that, and it happens. Just another thought is that sometimes I heard somebody on the panel, the woman said, while we sit in our ivory towers writing policies and expecting everybody to follow them, well, I think that's really important, is that the RPs don't quite understand all of this. We can guide them, we can give best practices, we can put our foot down in certain spots, but we also have to listen to them and understand that the world isn't as cut and dry as we might like it here from their perspective, so just working with them. And the networking is awesome. I just thought it was great when I walked in today and I saw so many people's faces that I know, and I know there's a lot of folks in the room that are going to help us succeed, and I appreciate that. And I wanted to mention that I think that's a really critical component of this organization. So I'm going to hand it over to Steve, heads our products, and I'll give you the clicker.
Push the button. Great. So when Denise told me that we were going on at 4:15 and we were going to do a demo, I said, oh God, no, we want these people to like us. So what I'm going to do is we're going to show you some selected screenshots that are not the things that you already know we do. When you imagine in your head, what does it look like to create an account? That's what our create an account looks like. When you imagine in your head, what does it look like to verify a credit card, verify a driver's license? That's what ours look like too. You all know what you're doing. Just imagine that you saw that and it worked flawlessly. And anybody who does really want to see this, I will be happy to take you through it live. This stuff is real. It all works. I just want to get you out of here in a reasonable amount of time. So I picked a couple of screens that will allow us to point out the things that we do differently and where our approach differs from all the other companies that you have in your head and are probably thinking of. And the first thing that I want to talk about is to call back to something Jeremy said during the last panel there. He lifted his head when I mentioned his name. One of the things they talked about was the notion that any organization can become an identity provider. Any organization can issue credentials, they can verify people to whatever level of assurance that they need, and that we're going to live in a world where the credential is going to be separate from the surface where it's being used. Very difficult to do today. And one of the things that Privo does to move us toward that vision is something, if you look here on the screen, you'll see the use an employee login button. And what we've done here is Privo is acting as an identity proxy. So we, for practical reasons, because a lot of people are going to come to us, they don't have their own identity that's usable in a federated way, we accept the same username and password that everyone else does. So you can create a username and password on our service, it works great, and now you've created another one, which nobody really wants to do. But what if you already have a SAML credential? What if you already have an account, and the only thing you can't do is wire it up to this relying party that you want to use it with? Well, that's where Privo comes in. So we right now have 3 ongoing projects. One, as Denise mentioned earlier, is with VMware. Another is with Verizon, and another is with a company called MyCard, all of whom are SAML identity providers. And what we allow you to do is associate your SAML credential with a Privo account so that we can, in effect, do web scale single sign-on. And the goal of all that stuff is for you to be able to, for you to be able to grant consent again for a child account. And what this screen is showing here is how we handle getting back to your original identity provider. You've associated your SAML credential. Now you want to use that to sign in. You're on a relying party. You click the sign in button, and if we haven't already signed you in, we ask you, how do we get back to your identity provider? And we have a map between an enterprise provided email address and the SAML identity provider. So we have a very clean way to get back to the IDP. And what this is all about, and I apologize, this screen is a little bit difficult to read. What this is all about is granting consent for a child to use a service. The way this process began, the way we got to these screens that you just saw, is that a child went to a service and they wanted to use it. They said, hey, this looks like fun. So they clicked the Create an Account button. And now what has to happen is, because this is a service, our notional service is using personal information about the child, we need the parent's consent. So they provided the email address of the parent. They provided the parent's Privo ID if they have it. And now we're able to connect the parent to the child for the purpose of granting consent. And what happens is a message is delivered to the parent, which when they activate it, they click a link in either the email message or the text message or on the mobile app or however it is that we've gotten to them. And now they see information about the service. They see what the service information is going to collect. They see what the service is going to do with that. And they see whether any of the features are optional. So for any one of these services, and Privo provides a very granular mechanism for the relying party to say, this is our basic service. It uses this information in this way. This is an option that the person can turn on. This is another option that the person can turn on. And what the green buttons are showing you is that optional services are turned on. So people can turn features on and off, and the service is then, the service can then know it has permission to make this functionality available and collect this data. Oh, go faster. So that's what there is to say. So everyone here is familiar with granting consent for themselves. That people, anytime you install an application on your iPhone, anytime you sign on to a new service, you're familiar with granting consent for yourself to use a service. What Privo does that's different, what Privo does that's unusual, is we create a way for a person to grant consent for someone else. Okay? And that's what's happening here, is that I, as the adult, am granting consent for someone else. And since this is a federated credential and it's going to be used potentially on a lot of different services may want different information about the child, in this case, the child who's going to be using the service. So what Privo does is it allows you is that it knows what information the service needs, and at the time the parent is granting consent, it asks for whatever pieces of information are missing. In this example, there was some bit of information that this service needs that no other service needed, so we had to add it. And we also show, very quickly, we also show information already collected about the child, which is a COPPA requirement. Privo has a very nice, centralized way to manage profiles, available through our My Privo service, which looks like profile management you've seen elsewhere. And we also have a directory of services that have been certified through our process. As Denise mentioned earlier, Privo is both a policy framework and technology to support it. So we have a list of services that have gone through our certification process and are Privo certified. And thank you.
Thank you, Privo team. And next we have Steve Brace for TSCP.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Phil. Okay, while we're waiting for the first slide to come up, just a little bit about TSCP. TSCP is a relatively small 501c nonprofit organization, and we've been around for about 10 years. We're a membership organization. with a number of governments. I think we have 5 governments, friendly governments, including the U.S. government and a number of the aerospace, IT, an oil and gas company, and a financial institution. So we mainly deal in secure collaboration. So the environment we're in is the level of assurance 4, level of identity assurance 4 environment, which is PKI based and is smart cards for the most part. And again, government, aerospace and defense, and a few other areas have those, representing several million credentials that are issued out there. And what we do is we're really not involved in the credential issuance area, but more in how you use the credential. So it's really secure collaboration, dealing with email, SharePoint, any of the collaboration vehicles out there. So of course, as we all know, having a trust framework, a set of operating rules around how you use those credentials from issuance to the usage to the retirement of the credentials is extremely important. So we have a lot of experience in our relatively closed community around trust frameworks. So our in-state grant was to really take that as a base and expand that into the financial sector. So now we would have 2 sectors that would agree on what a trust framework is, abstract that up to create a guidance document that could be used hopefully by anyone in the industry out there that's doing secure transactions. Along with creating the Trust Framework Developments Guidance, we also are using and testing that to create a fidelity pilot, and hopefully a couple other companies in our year 2. And I'm going to show you in a minute our fidelity pilot that we just recently successfully executed. So, all right, so here's the lead-in chart for the fidelity pilot. And what basically that is taking, as I mentioned before, the several million PIV and PIV-I cards, level of identity assurance 4 cards, which have been issued by either a government or a corporation, and really leveraging them for personal use. So that's really the niche here. What we found with Fidelity is that really depending on the product area that you're talking with, they have different business value. They want to see and they look at different business values. In the corporate side, where they're looking at 401ks and 401(k) kind of accounts, they're not so much concerned about fraud there. They're more concerned about cost, because a lot of their access is through single sign-on anyway. So cost is pretty important. Over on the personal account side, they're more concerned with fraud and ease of use. So really what we tried to hit on here with the demo, we want to try to appeal to all those. So we really hit on it: ease of use, lower cost, and lower fraud. So the members that we have involved with TSCP and with our NSTEC pilot are shown here. We have Airbus, which used to be known as EADS, recently changed their name, Raytheon, Microsoft, Northrop Grumman, and a couple government agencies, Department of Defense and DMDC. And we're using those credentials again to gain single sign-on access into either their workplace investing account, their corporate or government retirement fund, or into a personal investing account. And we picked 2 use cases. One which is really employer dictated on what their credential is and how the employee authenticates in, and that's the top one, and that could be like a 401k administrator, either working again for the government or a corporation administering a 401k account. And that user may need their smart card and the associated PIN and potentially a biometric reader. But the key is that the employer chooses what the person needs to authenticate with. The bottom use case is really the employee choice, and this is the personal use of the credential. And here, the employee can choose depending on whatever is important to them, increased security or whatever they have at the time, whatever the device allows them to authenticate with. The box in the middle there really talks about the employee responsibilities, the employer responsibilities, and I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next chart here. And so when we communicated this to Fidelity and actually showed them the demo, we got a really interesting result. As I went through the chart here and talked about the fact that there's a huge benefit to Fidelity and that the employer, the corporation or the government that's issued the cards, have a lot of sunk cost, right? They've invested their money in issuing the credential, vetting the employee, that they are who they say they are, issuing the credential, maintaining the credential, and then maintaining all of the support structure, the training, the help desk, all around the credential. And I got through this chart, and the lawyer, one of the lawyers that we've been working with in Fidelity, kind of piped up after he saw the demo, and he said, "Oh, so Fidelity doesn't issue a credential here?" And we've been working with this guy for 3 months now, trying to explain to him what we do. I said, no, you don't issue anything. And he said, well, how are we going to trust that credential? I went, okay, if it took a demo and 3 months to do, the light bulb went off, we're good now. All right, so it was kind of an interesting thing. Sometimes you need that visual there for really the point to sink in. But that's really the leverage here and the advantage that one of the key reasons why this is very attractive to Fidelity, and I think many other RPs, once they understand what you're really doing here. So that's the Fidelity demo that we did. Looking forward, we intend to take the success that we've had, really socialize that within Fidelity. We've been working pretty exclusively with the net benefits, sort of the corporate workplace investing side. We want to get engaged with the personal investing side, whole nother set of people, whole nother set of lawyers and management that we're going to have to engage. And then we also want to socialize that with a number of our members within the government and our corporate members to try to see if we can get some uptake and usage here going forward. So again, getting back to the Trust Framework Development Guidance, the process that we use for that, which I touched on a little bit earlier, is really taking the years of experience we have with the various trust framework elements in the level of assurance 4 arena and that have been used successfully to do millions of secure transactions with our TSCP members, and then introducing that and educating Fidelity, which has been a bit of a chore, especially with people that just flat out aren't familiar with what we're doing here at all. And getting them to first understand what the trust framework's really trying to do and what it says, and then getting them to agree that these particular elements, how we do liability, what type of agreements, what are the roles, how do we establish that trust in a federated environment, that they're comfortable with those trust framework elements. So that's really year one, and we're have one more quarter left in year one. In the last quarter, which is the next quarter, and also into year two, we want to extend beyond LOA 4 and move down into LOA 2 and level 3, and use some social credentials, maybe uplifted with some attributes, maybe from Dave Cox's ID Data Web attribute exchange, for example, and also some of the other level 3 credential environments that some of our members already use, like one-time password. But again, all these in a federated fashion. We've also just recently made a decision and talked to both Phil and Kat, which I think they're pretty excited about, to incorporate some of the NSTIC pilots in our trust framework work. And I found it, interesting that Denise and Matt and Ryan and some of the other pilots, not only talking today but in previous IDESG meetings, have really hit on the fact of how important the trust framework is. And we have a couple pilots now that have gotten to the point where they're either in production or they're very close to production, and they've had to kind of forge a new path and develop these trust framework elements on their own, either bilateral agreements or multilateral agreements or whatever the agreements are they need to do, be able to get all the parties to agree to do the secure transactions. So we're going to invite them to the table and also to also see if we can get a sort of a single trust framework guidance document that that larger body can accept and live with. So the milestones to date that we have, the Fidelity demo that I mentioned, we've also created a trust, expanded the trust framework that we had for level 4 in the usage area, mainly with relying parties. We've created the trust framework development guidance introduction. We have a description of each of, we have all the elements defined as best we know, and this is really the first draft. So once we put it out in the wild, I'm sure we'll get a lot of feedback that you're missing this or missing that, but this is a first draft. We have descriptions for each of the elements. We actually have a number of the elements built out, and we've started production on sort of the rest of the operating rules, and certainly all of the operating rules we're going to need to do a real live production pilot. We've created along the way a couple things that are kind of predecessors to actually creating the operating rules or the trust framework elements. One of them, Shauna Russell, who is probably here in the back, is one of our TSCP employees. She's leading our privacy effort and our legal effort, liability model effort. And Jana Bomer, who couldn't be here today, is really leading up the whole trust framework development guidance effort. So Shauna pulled a team of people together, sort of cross-industry, and came up with a white paper around privacy, really looking at permissible use, which you would think would be a pretty straightforward and easy thing, but it actually turns out that permissible use of these government-issued and corporate-issued credentials actually has a number of different privacy-related issues in addition to some other issues, but issues around, does the corporation, how does the corporation collect privacy information that ends up on those credentials, and how is that privacy information used, in the personal use environment? Do they need to track that somehow? Is there some liability associated with that? So a number of different privacy issues around there. And then another thing that TSCP has done is we've set up and executed 2 industry government information sharing forums, one with the help of Deb Gallagher here, and we had that at the GSA headquarters just about a month ago, had a very lively discussion. A number of the NSTIC pilots were there. It's open to the public, and if you would like to join, we're going to continue doing these about every 2 months or so. The last one we hit on a couple key trust framework topics, one of them being business model, one of them being liability model. We touched on permissible use a little bit, and we're actually doing a little plug here for a Birds of the Feather session tomorrow, I believe, and we'll be talking more about the business model, right? What are the factors that corporations, relying parties, need to really understand to be able to make a business decision on accepting federated credentials, higher level of assurance credentials. I think I was on the wrong chart there. Sorry about that. That's all what I just said. So what have we learned to date? Really, we've learned a number of things about permissible use. Again, the things I talked about just a minute ago. We've learned that the business model, as I referenced a little bit earlier, can be very complex, and it really depends on who you're talking to. So there's not one business model that fits everybody, right? As I mentioned with Infidelity, in their corporate area where they manage retirement accounts, they're not so concerned about fraud. They're more concerned about cost, and they're more concerned about having the single sign-on experience being as seamless and easy as possible. On the personal investing side, they're much more concerned about ease of use, because that's what the individual investor wants, right? They're competing with all the other financial institutions out there that have the latest, greatest web app on, and being able to very quickly get that out to all the different mobile devices, et cetera, et cetera. So, and Denise mentioned that with privacy, right? They're much less apt to agree to any type of encumbrance that you're going to put on the login experience relative to privacy than the workplace investing, than the corporate requirement side of Fidelity Investment. So, I'm kind of getting into some details here, but I'm doing that intentionally to show you that, every RP is different, and it's not only an RP, but it's the different products within the RP can have very different motivators when it comes to looking at adopting this technology. The other really interesting thing that we found, and I think probably everybody knows this, either you've run into it before or you will, especially if you're dealing with RPs, is that our community, our identity and access management community, is a pretty closed community, and a lot of people know everybody, and we have our own little language. And once you get outside of that community, which is really where the people that are making the business decisions live, right? They don't really understand hardly anything relative to identity and access management. So to even further compound that, if you try to find the identity and access management organization within a company, a lot of times it's very small and it's buried pretty deep. So the decision makers around budget, on who needs to make the decisions on adopting the type of technologies that we want to put out there, or making decisions on trust frameworks, can be very disconnected and very far away from a management level standpoint from the INAM community. So last chart, how can the IDESG help our pilot? And I was kind of pleased to see, I think each of the pilots have effectively said the same thing. The words might be a little different, but one of the key ones that I just hit on here is really training. We spent an enormous amount of time creating charts and trying to tune the message and understand how we put translators in place to explain to the business people in major corporations that have really no clue what INAM is, what do we really hear about? What is federation? What are credentials? Why is it important? So any training or education that the IDESG could provide all of us, I think would really help in the adoption area. Providing and packaging up success stories. There's nothing like seeing, like the demo I mentioned with Fidelity, and having that so someone else could use it. Here's something that actually worked, out in the industry. Lessons learned, like we're doing here. I think having that publicly available and easily accessible would be important. And then the last is really to continue to support the collaboration. I know Denise kind of ended with that. I personally get an awful lot of information out of these meetings, just talking to other people and listening to what everybody's going through, and I think having this forum is a very important thing. So that's it. Thank you very much for your time, and back to you, Phil.
So at this point, I'd like to invite the pilot presenters to come up to the stage, and then we can do a panel Q&A. If there are any questions from the room, please come up to one of the mics, or if there's any questions online. No questions? Please, sir.
Okay, I'm Bob Panero, and I have a question for Denise. Do the relying parties that you work with, do they require that the parents have a private account or give permission through private before the kid is allowed to access anything on that site? In other words, what would prevent the kid from giving their friend's email address instead of the parents? Wouldn't they still be able to get it unless there's a requirement that they have to get permission first from private or something comparable?
Suite, a hub of RESTful services, so that they may not use Privo to create any account, but rather just to assert the attribute that we have a verified parent associated to the email that they're using to process consent for themselves. But COPPA basically dictates what they have, the level of parental consent they have to get in order to collect, use, or disclose personally identifiable information. And we won't let anybody use our service if they haven't been certified through our process. And as our trust framework becomes available, then we'll allow our other assessors to certify under the framework as well and accept those into the service. But absolutely, kids can fib. So it gets kind of, is it a site directed to kids? Yes. Is it primarily directed to kids? No. It's a mixed audience. Then you can use an age gate. You can let a kid tell you how old they are to then start the process, and there starts the downward spiral of not actually putting all the kids through. So it depends on the actual service. Hope that answers.
Colin, I think you're next.
Yeah, Colin Suter. Matt, you mentioned the NSTIC-derived requirements, I guess, in their relationship to operational pilots.
Yeah.
As you're probably aware, there's a number of the committees are also looking at the derived requirements.
Sure. Yeah, privacy is doing a great job, and I joined one of their calls recently. In fact, while you've been out, I've continued some of the pilot collaboration calls with a few of the pilots that are up here, and some that aren't, to continue to discuss kind of what our real-world experiences are with the derived requirements, where the language may need to be changed a little bit. But we've been trying to feedback that those findings or discussion points into the different working groups.
Do you think that, are there particular observations that were made that would feed into each of the committees? That you obviously started with privacy because they were quite active in that. Do you think there's similar observations?
Yeah, I'm happy to participate in any of the different working groups that, to share the discussion that we've had among the pilots around these. I don't think it's sufficient for all the pilots to be on all the, calls per se, which is why we have continued the pilot collaboration calls on Fridays. But drilling down into these derived requirements and really talking about what's happening where the rubber meets the road, so to say, and then feeding that back into the groups is something that we're absolutely signed up to do.
Great, thanks.
And I'd just like to add that I know that we've taken the PEM and pulled it apart and done the crosswalk, and we've tried to use COPPA as well as the derived requirements and sort of bridge all of that. But the PEM is super useful. It's really useful. And it's hard to get your arms around at first, but I think it's a really good piece of output from this community that is going to make a difference.
Hi, my question is based on some of the insights we got from the last panels talking about people being reluctant to share information. They're the parents of kids trying to go down, getting onto the internet. They may not want to have that much information out there. Do we have use cases saying they don't want to share, they don't care about having advertisements tailored to their kid or anything like that? They just want to let the child go and do something they may have to do for school. Is there a use case that says this is limited to, we don't ask a lot of data, but the parent can get on there anyway?
So the first use case is that, or at least with us, is that the child account has this very limited bundle associated to it that could have as much as age, gender, because it's important, right? A 5-year-old's very different than a 9-year-old is different than a 14-year-old as far as what you're going to serve up. And no data has to flow, and behavioral advertising is governed under COPPA. You can't do it without verifiable parental consent at a reliable level. So the first thing is, does the kid have in our world, we're providing him a credential that he could log on to any service that doesn't trigger COPPA, that the service will accept that authentication, and there's no PII flowing. If he wants to engage in a contest that requires a video upload, and now he's going to put a picture of himself up to the World Wide Web and share it with this commercial company, then moms have to approve the disclosure of PII. And in the kids space, audio, video, face pictures, all of that is device IDs, unique identifiers, display names, if they can be strung together, is all considered PII. So.
Angela Ray, one question for the gentleman with ID Me and the other one for the TSCP. On the ID Me, you made a comment that you are involved in accessing veteran benefits in the military community. Tell me what that means. Do you have a federal agency as a relying party for your ID?
ID Me? Yeah, so the point,
just want a clarification on that so I understand what that
yeah, so what we did is we basically set up technical interfaces with different authoritative and reliable databases to verify somebody's assertion of military affiliation to access benefits and services, whether it's an Under Armour 10% discount or we have a pilot running currently with Veterans Affairs to verify that somebody's eligible for taxpayer-funded educational opportunities through the VA, so that sub-organization doesn't have to collect PII on the individual, which they didn't want to do, and they didn't want to have to maintain an audit log of that information, so we took on that responsibility for that entity that works with the VA.
Okay, great. I think I'll follow up with you offline because I'd like to ask some more questions down that path.
Sure.
And then on the TSCP, two questions. One, you were saying you're working on a pilot where the federal PIV-I card or corporate PIV-I card was being used by the employee to access their personal benefits. Did I understand that correctly?
You did.
It did. So what are the logistics of that? Are they only able to do it at work? I mean, the PIV-I card at home, are you giving them a reader? How are you walking through the logistics of that?
So you were in our first meeting we had with Fidelity, I think.
Oh, was I?
Those are the same
I'm
questions that we really talked about in our first meeting. How would this work, right? So the notion is it's federating the use of these employer-issued credentials. So the same way that they would use their credentials at work, they could use them to access, any account outside in the personal space. So if they have a company-issued laptop, then sticking the smart card into a smart card reader or sticking it directly into an embedded reader into the laptop, or if you had a cell phone or a mobile device that has a card reader, a USB card reader in it, you would put the card in, you would enter the PIN, that would authenticate you back to the identity provider. So if I'm a Lockheed Martin employee, I would authenticate to Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin would create a SAML assertion and then send that to Fidelity. So Fidelity basically sets up an account under the covers, or you already have an account. They associate the SAML assertion with your account, and you get, from your standpoint, the employer standpoint, you get a single sign-on experience directly into Fidelity.
And the white paper that you reference of acceptable use, other uses of that PIV information, is that something that you can make public?
I'm looking at Shauna right behind you. Are you nodding your head up and down or sideways like this?
Yeah, it's hard to see anyone.
The question is the privacy white paper. Is that something that we could share out in the wild? Yeah, that's what I thought. So yes, we can make that available.
Generally on what timeline?
As soon as we can email it out to you. So.
Understood. Okay.
Yeah. Be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So typically we run out of time when we have a chance to ask questions of the pilots, and since we did such a thorough job of the strategic planning update, we're not going to have the Management Council and Board of Directors update from 5 to 5:20. So if you have more questions, this is a great time to be able to ask those. Don't feel like we're trying to be pressed for time. So please ask more questions about the pilots.
Are there any questions online from the online? Okay. Sir?
Hi, Lorenzo De Leon. I do have a question to the TSCP. pilot. In your pilot, it's the person, what my boss likes to call the carbon unit, using the employer's credential to identify themselves.
Correct.
So when the carbon unit leaves, what happens?
Well, at least for a level of assurance for credential, part of the trust framework demands that the issuer, the employer, or the company that has issued the credential on behalf of the employer has a very short period of time, 18 hours typically, to revoke that credential. So that credential is no longer allowed to be used by the ex-employee. So that's a scenario where if you look at longevity, and we've actually had this conversation with Fidelity, what does Fidelity do at that point? So, when the person leaves, they still have their 401k account. They still need to access their 401k or 401(b) account. So Fidelity would then need to step up and give them an ID, user ID and password at that point.
A more traditional one. I think this is a more general question, is who should own the credential? Is it the carbon unit or is it some other party?
Well, and that's exactly why we want to, this was really step one for us because it was the easiest thing to do. We have this population with millions of issued credentials, and we'd like to be able to leverage them outside of their originally intended use, which was in the government or in the corporation. But we want to expand and use social credentials or really any other kind of credential which would be not associated with, their place of employment, like a Google ID or something out there.
Itself.
Yeah, that could be associated directly with the carbon unit
Right.
that you mentioned there. And then uplift that, to get it at the right level of identity assurance.
With additional attributes?
Yeah, with additional attributes or whatever.
Thank you.
So I just want to add to that, so we're looking at two uses, but one is just getting the verified adult. So because there aren't a lot of verified adult credentials running around out there in the marketplace, we have to ask a parent to, choose a method to verify. And in choosing those methods, we actually perform some of the verification. They can choose last 4 digits of social or driver's license, credit card, print forms, phone calls, and our goal is to have as many methods. So we created Online Privacy Matters Employer Benefit Program, where we can go to employers who already have SAML credentials that exist, and they can offer the Privo family account service in the membership benefits, so that in our case, the first implementation of VMware employee can click on that Privo service and create an account. And I don't now have to ask any of that personal information about the user. And quite frankly, if they leave the employment, they still are an adult, and I've gone beyond that for the parent-child relationship. So if they were to leave and not use that credential anymore, we have to do the same thing, Fidelity, right? We have an underlying credential, they just don't know they really have it yet. They have to invoke creating or associating another credential to it to continue to work. But we get we're using it for the verification as, separate from the continued login as well.
Hi, it's Andrew Hughes, Vice Chair of the Plenary. And I've got my Vice Chair of the Plenary hat on right now when I'm asking this question of the NPO. We keep hearing about this great network effect that the pilots are creating amongst themselves. The great collaboration, the great connections, the commonality. How are those new connections being documented and shared back to IDSG? So the original pilots were scoped out with the original organizations in collaboration, but we're hearing about all these new connections between the companies and organizations involved in all of the pilots. How is that being captured so that we, the plenary, can tap into it? I think Jeremy's going to answer.
So I'd say a lot of it's being shared here, and you're seeing the fruits of it not only in the pilots sharing this with you, but also actually bringing a lot of this to the committees. I think when you look at where the leadership is coming from in a lot of the committees, while it's certainly not exclusively coming from the pilots, turn around, look who's behind you. It's the standards chair, who's also an NSTIC pilot. I think there's a lot of the learnings that are making their way in when you see who's actually participating. But I'd also say some of it's a little bit out of scope. If Privo and ID.me form a business relationship based on this that just happens to be because they met at one of our plenaries and decided that they had a mutual business interest, but it doesn't actually have any impact that's going to drive something in the steering group, my take would be great for them. It may not necessarily be something that needs to be shared. We make a real big point within our office of trying to ensure that as lessons are learned and as new ideas come about and new discoveries are made, that it's shared with the steering group. And you guys can know, I think we encourage all the pilots, encourage might be a gentle word at times, to make sure that they really do get actively involved in the steering group and share this information. But in terms of a more formalized process to make sure that they document every new thing that comes out, some things are going to happen in the market as companies and organizations move forward. My take is, and by the way, I would say if anybody thinks it's not happening, please let us know, because we really want to encourage it. But I would think 95% of what's actually going on is being shared within the broader steering group right now, whether it's at a specific committee level or in forum like this. And there probably are a few things that may be company proprietary or whatnot.
Yeah. Okay.
I can tell you very specifically. We have biweekly meetings with Phil and Kat. I don't think a meeting goes by where at one point either Phil or Kat or both of them ask us, well, when are you going to be ready to share this in the Trust Framework Trustmark Committee or the Privacy Committee? So they're very proactive about trying to get us, and I think you guys are shaking your head too, right? Yeah. So they've been, and I think will continue to be very proactive to push us.
And we the plenary appreciate that very much, because it's very significant to us to hear the success stories. What I think also trying to get at is we do hear your request to support the message and promote the value and the brands and the network effect. Is there anything that the pilots would be able to do or willing to do to feed us more of that messaging so that IDSG as a whole can incorporate it and push it back out? Because talking to the committees is one level. That won't get into the outward push, the outward messaging. It just won't. There's no connection there in the plenary to do that function. The committees do the work, not necessarily at the marketing and promotion level. So if there's anything in the committee, in the pilot collaboration group that would be great fodder for messaging at the plenary level, maybe a conduit to the chairs, not really sure how it would work, but we want to tell the story, but we need the story from you to tell.
Thank you. Kathy Tilton.
Yes, thank you for introducing me. Matt, I think this question is for you. I believe it was you that said you're happy when RPs have heard of FICAM. Mm-hmm. And so my question is, are you seeing interest on the part of the commercial RPs in FICAM certification? And if so, what value do they attribute to it? And then I have a question for Denise.
Yeah, no, it's more, again, about educating on understanding this concept of levels of assurance and tying that to their kind of risk framework within the organization. A lot of these companies are RPs we're talking to because they want to outsource their identity kind of component of their business, right? And they want to look to someone that is certified and basically focused on providing that as a service, which is why we're kind of in the discussion with them anyway. But I was using that as a reference because that's really the only kind of standard that we bring to these commercial RPs. So it just, I'm always happy when someone's heard of it because it helps with the education process, which again is why we're hoping out of IDSG we get some type of commercially recognized trust mark that we can educate them on that instead of FICAM, which isn't completely relevant to them, but it's the only reference point we have.
Okay, thanks. And I think you may have answered Denise's question, but Denise, as you're building out your trust framework, do you have any plans to get it FICAM accredited, or is that totally not needed in your environment?
So it's my understanding that I can go at a FICAM level 1 sort of self-asserted process, which we absolutely are going to tackle. If we have the resources to do the extra lift, then I would love to be FICAM approved at level 2 and level 3, especially since we're creating derived credentials from very extremely verified sources. And more than that, I've went out and looked around across the federal government. There's about 160 websites, mobile apps, and others that are directed to children, all of which are creating separate silos of username and passwords with no email for password reset because they're too scared to collect that from a child. So instead, we know their mother's maiden name and all their other secret questions. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to provide a FICAM-approved service across the federal government for STEM projects and other services that are actually directed to kids and are struggling with that communication, because it's all about getting permission to gather enough information to have a communication, a dialogue with the consumer.
Great. Are there any other questions from the room? And anything from online? Well, thank you very much. Thank you all pilots for participating. I believe the presentations are online as well as some of the contact information if you have any more additional questions. So thank you. One brief announcement. There was a black iPhone found in the ladies' restroom. So if you were missing a black iPhone and possibly left it in the ladies' restroom, we have Kathy. And then a BlackBerry phone holder was found elsewhere, not in the ladies' bathroom. So that's all up here.
Thank you. So we are at the end of day 1. There's really not any additional announcements that, excuse me, I have to give regarding today. Thank you so much for asking lots of great questions and being engaged in the process. We will be having a chairs meeting for those that are interested, and then there's plenty of time for you to start your informal networking before the social hour, and then the social gathering starts exactly at 6 o'clock, maybe a few minutes before, but 6 to 7:30 is the time frame where we'll have like refreshments along with networking. So thanks again. The chairs meeting is downstairs in lecture room E. It's a bit of a maze, but just follow the signs. It's easier if you do take the stairs instead of the elevator, but both places will get you downstairs. It just takes you a few twists and turns to get to the lecture room. So today is adjourned. Thank you very much. Tomorrow, please remember that we start a little early. We start at 8:15. But like I said earlier, the cafeteria opens at 7:30 if you want to grab some food. Thank you.